first. Oh Lord, within my soul, I long for purity, to be complete and whole, alone through thee. There is no way. Salvation full, salvation free, must come alone through thee. I bend before the cross, and know my heart can be, whence from its hidden dross alone through thee. There is no way. Salvation full, salvation free, must come alone through thee. I pray at thy dear feet, salvation full entreat, and want to feel my love in thee complete. There is no way. Salvation full, salvation free, must come alone through thee. My faithful Lord believes the promise made to me, and perfect peace receives alone through thee. There is no way. Salvation full, salvation free, must come alone through thee. And 859. There is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners washing in that flood, lose all their guilty stains, lose all their guilty stains, lose all their guilty stains, and sinners washing in that flood, lose all their guilty stains. The dying thief rejoiced to see that fountain in his day, and may I there, though at sea, wash all my sins away, wash all my sins away, wash all my sins away, and may I there, though at sea, wash all my sins away. Verse 4. And when this feeble faltering tongue lies silent in the brain, then in a nobler, sweeter song I'll sing the power to save. I'll sing the power to save. I'll sing Okay, and if the children want to come up to the front, we can sing a few children's songs, and then I'll turn the time over to Marius. So the children can come up to the front. Okay, there's not quite as many children here tonight, so you're really going to have to sing, but the rest can join in as well. So the first song I have is Oh, Be Careful Little Eyes, and Dave talked about this song a few weeks ago when he talked about temptation. So we'll sing eyes, ears, hands, feet, and mind. And if you have motions, you can do them. I'm not sure if I know the motions to the song, but start with Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. There's a Father up above, and He's looking down in love. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. There's a Father up above, and He's looking down in love. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. There's a Father up above, and He's looking down in love. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. There's a Father up above, and He's looking down in love. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. Oh, be careful, little mind, what you think. Oh, be careful, little mind, what you think. There's a Father up above, and He's looking down in love. So be careful, little mind, what you think. Okay, and then let's sing He's Got the Whole World. We'll sing He's Got the Whole World, and then all the little children, and then moon and stars. He's got the whole world. In His hands 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 He's got all the little children. In His hands He's got all the little children. In His hands He's got all the little children. In His hands He's got the whole world. In His hands He's got the moon and the stars. In His hands He's got the moon and the stars. In His hands He's got the moon and the stars. In His hands He's got the whole world. In His hands. All right, and then one more. We'll sing I Have Decided to Follow Jesus. 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 No turning back, no turning back. If no one joins me, still I will follow. If no one joins me, still I will follow. If no one joins me, still I will follow. No turning back, no turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. The cross before me, the world behind me. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back, no turning back. Okay, you can go back to your parents. And Marius, I'll turn the time over to you.
I greet you in Jesus' name, and welcome to our evening service. Just a few words before I give the time to Brother John. I wanted to let you know that I met Brother John about 11 years ago. Of course, I wouldn't know that, but just a couple months, he sent me an email with a picture, and in that picture, it was myself and another 14 young people from Suceava. We were visiting Kenya, and he was serving there at that time. So I thought that's interesting to meet after years, being under the same roof, serving in the same church. So I'm very excited to hear how God works in Kenya in 2023. Let's stand for prayer. And Brother Sam, would you like to lead us in prayer? And you can pray for Brother John as he's sharing.
Heavenly Father, thank you for your wonderful love and marvelous grace, your protection today. Father, thank you for health and strength. Thank you for the gift of life, and especially the gift of eternal life. Father, I pray that we will be vessels in spreading your word, and especially spreading your truth as we speak your word. Father, we thank you for this privilege this evening, and we ask that you will bless, lead, and guide John. Speak to us about the work in Kenya, and may we in turn have a burden for the lost. We thank you in Jesus' name.
Amen. You may be seated.
Sure, will this come back on?
Hit the on button twice.
Twice.
It's going to take a moment.
Okay. Okay, good evening. What I plan to do this evening is talk a little at first about the country of Kenya, the mission, what we were doing when we were there, and then I have some pictures also that I'd like to show, and maybe talk a little while we look at the pictures also. Most of you are probably aware that we did serve in Kenya a while back. From April of 2009 to October of 2012 we were there. And so now we were asked to go back again to fill in for someone that was going on furlough. We hadn't been there again in those 10 plus years since we terminated. Hadn't worked out any time. So we were glad for the privilege to go back. In fact, we were asked to serve at the same church where we had served most of the 3.5 years that we were there previously. So people ask us sometimes, what was the highlight of your being there these 7 weeks? And I think we usually say it was meeting the people again that we got to know and love and appreciate. Our brothers and sisters in the faith, many of them there at the church at Lela, as well as some other of the churches there. By the way, the churches there are called, we don't call them beachy churches there, although technically I guess they are that. We call them CBF, which means Christian Believers Fellowship. So we were delighted to find that there were still many of the same members in the church there. It's a small church. Churches there are generally kept small because most people walk to church. And so when there are some members in a certain area that have maybe an hour to walk to church, then what we like to do is start another church there so it's closer to their homeland. The country of Kenya is in East Africa. It's bordered on the south, on the southeast by the Indian Ocean, and on the southwest by Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is the second largest freshwater lake in the world, next to Lake Superior. The size of the country of Kenya, about the size of Texas. In land mass, it's about the size of Texas. From what I could gather, the population today is around 53 million, where Texas has 30 million. Now you must understand that a lot of Kenya, though, is barren land, desert. And so those 53 million are in a certain area or areas. They're not scattered out throughout the whole country. And so there's people everywhere is sort of the way it is. When you come back here to America and drive the roads, there's nobody out here. When you're driving the roads in Kenya, there's just people everywhere, seems like most of the time. The government is a democracy. They have a president that's have an election every 5 years. Considered a fairly stable democracy. Not always so much, though, that way. I'll talk a little about that later. Most of the people in Kenya are black, although there are quite a number of Asian people there, Indians. In the town of Kisumu, a lot of the businesses are operated by the Asian people. And so, you have the black-skinned people, you have the Asians that are a bit darker than we are, and then the whites, are a minority. When you go to town or somewhere, you always notice if there's somebody else white around. But when you're there a while, it seems like you don't think of skin color so much. It's sort of, you get to know the people by their faces, their personality, and you sort of forget about the skin color. There's a number of tribes, different tribes in Kenya, and each tribe has their own language. Now, the official language of Kenya is English, and so most of the signs are in English. Government offices, there'll be people there that talk English. A lot of people know English, actually. They're taught it in school nowadays. So the official language is English. The national language is Swahili. So a lot of people can speak Swahili, but then every tribe also has their own language. So a lot of people can talk their tribal language plus Swahili. A little like some of us. We learned Pennsylvania Dutch, and then we soon learn English. And then some can also talk English, more and more so. The older generation, not so much. There's still a lot of people that don't understand English. For that reason, we always use an interpreter in our services. When we went visiting, often we took somebody along to interpret for us. Not always, though. There were some people we could visit that knew English well enough that we could visit freely with them. So each tribe has their own language. We were there in Kisumu, and that is the Luo tribe, L-U-O. The Luo tribe is the tribe that's mostly there in that area. And so the Luo language is what they speak. When we were there first, we studied the language for a couple months, and we learned some. We didn't learn to speak it fluently, but we learned basic greetings, phrases, and so on. And so it was sort of interesting when we went back now that how much of that sort of came back. We just remembered a lot of that, it seemed, that we had sort of lost maybe over the years. AMA, Amish Mennonite Aid, began their work there in the early 90s. I think they had terminated their work in Germany, and so they were looking for another area to go into, and they somehow came in contact with Lamp and Light. There were already a lot of people there in Kenya, if I remember correctly, that were taking the Lamp and Light courses, and so Lamp and Light said, well, here'd be a good place to have a mission, to put a base at. And so through that, AMA moved into Kenya back in the early 90s. Now, presently there is one of the staff, one of the missionaries there in Kisumu that works mainly with Lamp and Light. Just in the last couple of years, I think they opened a Lamp and Light office there in town. It's a little bit like a library. People can go in there and read books or buy books, or they can even go in there and sit there and do their Lamp and Light courses there. That's just very close to the compound where we lived. Anyway, AMA moved in there, and they now have, and for a number of years, have had 2 mission stations there, one in Nakuru, one in Kisumu, about 3 hours apart. So the one in Kisumu is where we have been at. Kisumu, like I said, is right by Lake Victoria, Now, AMA also previously had what they called the Agape program, which was the humanitarian aid part of the work. So back when we were there earlier, we were quite busy with orphans program. There were like 1,600 orphans on the program. There were the widows program. We gave out widows parcels. There was a well program where we had people dig wells and help people build houses at times. Now, a lot of the funds then already were coming from Christian Aid Ministries. And so more recently, they decided it would be better if a Christian Aid would have a base there and oversee the work. And I think it's working out well. They have a base now out in the Kudu area. And so that humanitarian aid part of the work has been given over to Christian Aid, most of it. There was maybe several reasons why that was seen as being better. And I think it frees up the mission pastors to be more involved in church work and not be so busy with the agape part of it. Open Hands also is active there in Kenya. They have their savings groups, getting people together and giving them teaching on finances and helping them to pool their money together, save, and then make loans and start businesses and so on. So, there's a number of personnel there, especially out in the Kudu. There's, beside the AMA personnel, there's also CAM and Open Hands personnel there. Okay, like I said, we lived in Kisumu. The missionaries there live together in a compound surrounded by hedge and fence. There's one main gate. That's where you need to drive into the compound. Maybe I'll show some pictures about that on that later. So mostly, there have a few times there have been missionaries that lived outside the compound, but mainly they live inside the compound there. The compound there's probably maybe a dozen or more dwellings in there. There's about 5 double houses they have carports, so they're joined by the carports, and there's be 2 families living in a double house like that. So the majority of the families in that compound are mission families, although there are a few others, a few blacks and a couple other nationalities, I believe. By the way, if you have any questions while I'm talking, maybe you just raise your hand and make yourself known.
I know that there's something about compounds that sort of I don't like, with fence walls and stuff. Mm-hmm. What is some of the reason for that?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I know there are people that are maybe a bit critical of doing it that way. Probably one reason is for safety. Very seldom did we go out in the evening after dark. Now, there are exceptions to that, but I think that is one reason for safety. There may be some other reasons. I know we discuss this sometimes as missionaries, and we sort of concluded there's probably more than one right way to do missions. Some people would say that that's not a good way to do it. You should live out with the people. I think it's working. So, we lived in the compound together, but the churches we ministered to are out there. So almost daily we would travel out to where the people are.
I think that sometimes we don't realize the vulnerableness that American people are like a spectacle in a country like that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
With the wealth and so on.
Right.
And so it's probably more for safety's sake than anything else.
Yeah. And in the early years of the mission there were some, you may have heard some of the stories of things that happened where missionaries almost lost their lives. Now, more recently, people are more friendly and open. In fact, the church there where we ministered at Lela, just within sight of that church, that's where Ken Miller and Gene Beachy almost lost their lives. The people there were hostile, many of them, toward the missionaries. They accused them of being bloodsuckers and so on. But yeah, the people now will tell us the attitude is much different now than it was then.
Do the CAM personnel live in the compound with the AMA workers, or do they live in their own compound?
I don't think they live, now see, CAM is out in the Kudu area, and we were in Kisumu, but I don't think they're inside the AMA, the compound where the AMA missionaries are. I'm not positive of the housing situation there, but I think they are elsewhere, if I'm not mistaken. So presently there are 5 mission families there in Kisumu, plus several singles, usually often several girls for school teachers. The mission has their own school there for their own children. There's 2 families terminating next year, but interestingly, there's 5 families committed to going next year. Now you say, well, then there'll be, 8 families? Yeah, I think so. And the reason for that is that there is a good possibility of starting more churches. I know they were talking about at least 3 areas there within reach of the Kisumu mission that are possibilities for starting churches. One is out in an area where there's just people there that somehow heard of the teaching of the CBF churches. They're interested. They've been having families been going out, or sometimes several families to have Bible study there, so they really want a church there. And then there's another area or two where, like maybe there's some members living there already. They have far to go to church, so we'd like to put a church there closer to where they're at. So yeah, each of the mission pastors there, each of the missionaries that lives within the compound usually has their own church to go to and minister at. There's several that have been given bishop charges, so they would likely have several churches under their oversight. So there are, I think I'm correct, 12 CBF churches in the Kisumu area at this point. Some of them are as far as almost an hour and a half drive from the compound.
So how many are in the Kuru area?
There's less. I think there's 5 or 6. I'm not positive about that, but there's less there. So where we went to, go ahead.
You have a figure of numbers?
Of members.
Peak members? Yeah.
I knew that back then when we were there, but I'm not sure what it is now.
AMA reported the ministry was it 600 or 800?
That would sound right. Yeah, I think so, but yeah, I didn't check that out recently. Yeah, the church we went to was about 20-minute drive or so. We were one of the closer ones. There are also a number of national pastors. I think there's like 16 now, maybe. And really, that's what we're working for, to turn the churches over to them. And so it's a blessing to have been able to commission and ordain a number of national pastors, 2 national bishops. And it hasn't always worked out. There have been a number that were in the ministry and fell away for one reason or another, but many of them have been faithful for years. So that's just really a blessing to be able to see national leadership taking over. There are a few churches where there are no mission pastors. The nationals are in charge. Okay, so you may wonder, well, what did we do there? Sort of a weekly schedule. Every Monday, usually every Monday forenoon, would be our pastors' meeting. So the mission pastors there within the compound would get together, and we'd give a report of our Sunday services. We'd talk about issues and make decisions. You see, many of the pastors don't have or some at least don't have a pastor's team at their particular congregation. So this is like our ministers' meeting. We get together Monday mornings and help each other make decisions and work through issues. So that's usually Monday mornings. Sometimes it goes into the afternoon. Now once a month, the 2 national bishops come in and and joined the pastor's meeting there. Okay, so that's Monday. Then every Wednesday, every church has their Bible study. Often it's in somebody's home. Often Wednesday afternoons in somebody's home, or sometimes at the church. So there's a time of singing, some teaching, usually by the pastor, and then a time of prayer, typical of what we're used to here.
We don't get together in the afternoon.
No, we don't. We're too busy, aren't we? Yeah.
Why aren't you working?
Well, Bible studies are generally small. Some of them are working, but a number of them, they don't have jobs 5 days a week or 6 days like we do, and so they're a little more free to come. But yeah, Bible studies tend to be smaller. Not everyone comes. Every Thursday evening, we would have prayer meeting there within the compound for the mission families. Get together for a half hour singing and a time of prayer and a time of fellowship. So that was usually, in the evening within the compound there. And then, of course, for Sunday services, instruction class often. Instruction class there is an ongoing thing usually. We have it year-round. So when somebody qualifies, if they've been coming to church for several Sundays and have an interest, we will interview them. They can join the class, and we keep record of how long they've been coming. So we have a book we go through, and so when they have completed all the lessons, maybe they're allowed to miss a time or two, but then we would consider them qualified or interview them for they would be a candidate for baptism at that point. So we just keep going through the book all year round pretty much, if there is someone in the class anyway. So that is usually at 9 o'clock, and then by 10 there is Sunday school and preaching services. And like I said, we always have an interpreter.
How do the missionaries, how do you know, or the national pastors, know who qualifies and who doesn't? What are some of the disqualifications?
For instruction class. Well, we have a sheet with interview questions, and so we try to determine if they know the Lord, if they've been converted, and their status in marriage. Make sure that they're not have a second wife or something like that, and so by that we try to determine if they're ready for the instruction class. And then, of course, we observe, we see how well they do in coming and how interested they are, and then if they have completed the class, the lessons, then we interview them again. Do you have any other thoughts or questions on that? Is that how you did in Belize? Okay, so yeah, that's sort of the weekly thing. Then when we were there, we did a lot of visiting, which, the pastors, the missionaries do that a lot. The church there at Lela is a small church. The attendance was often around 40, and there's a lot of widows in that church. I think we visited most, because in their culture, widows, one reason is HIV in Kenya has taken the lives of many men, and the other reason is that it is taboo in their culture for a widow to marry again. There's very, very seldom that a widow remarries, and so there's just lots of widows, I think, mainly for those two reasons probably. So I think we were able to visit most of the families in the church, as well as some friends and acquaintances from some of the other churches that we had gotten to know years ago. And there were a lot more people we would have liked to visit, but time was limited. We also visited a few former members, had been members at Lela, and for various reasons left the church. So we visited a few of those, and we were well received by them. It was interesting to meet them again. So that's pretty much what we did. Now, for a long-term pastor, there's a lot of other work. There's interviews, like I was saying, and work with sin problems. You hear something about a member, so you need to go check it out, or working with relationship problems within the church or within the neighborhood or whatever. And marriage issues, or just lots and lots of work for a mission pastor there.
John, would there also be, like, outside the church, do the mission pastors get invited to, like, preach at funerals and other things?
Yeah, we would attend some other funerals, and it's not uncommon if someone dies and a family member is a member of our church, but the person that died is not, they would ask us to conduct a funeral or to preach. So yeah, we preached at a number of funerals of non-members, and we really consider that as the evangelistic opportunities that we have there. AMA's focus in Kenya is sort of discipleship, because there are lots and lots of churches in Kenya. I know Merle Beachy used to say that Christianity in Kenya is a mile wide and an inch deep, and that's a little how it is. There's lots of so-called Christians, but as far as discipleship, there's a need of teaching on that. But then when we went to funerals, lots of people there, unconverted people, and that was really an opportunity to preach the gospel. And being at a funeral in Kenya is quite an experience. It's certainly different than what we're used to. And we were at a wedding there also in an Anglican church, and that is also quite an experience. It really made me thankful for the orderly and just the quiet and orderly way that we do things, the peaceful, quiet way that we do things. And that, their funerals and their weddings it's a Kenya experience to be one of them. Okay, unit life, we should talk a little about that. When you're over there, you're, of course, away from a lot of your family in America, so the unit there, and of course, I guess it's especially so when you live in a compound together, so the unit there is sort of like your family away from home. So you really get close to each other, you appreciate each other, you're sort of like family. And so there are some unit activities, things that we would do together there. Of course, the weekly Bible study, but some other events too, occasional suppers together, or sometimes we'd say we're going to go out to the lake this Sunday evening and have a supper out there together and things like that. And then there's entertaining visitors, lots of visitors coming. I remember when the Romanian group was there, and I just realized not so long ago that indeed Marius was there. And we had a group from Hillcrest there years back. This time there was a group from Mountain View there under their discipleship program. If they commit to 15-month service, they get to go on a trip somewhere. So the Mountain View group was there. There was several Canadian girls there that just came because they wanted to go on the mission field and do some work and get involved. And so then you have the visitors to entertain. So we did. Sometimes we had to say no to groups like that because it made too much work actually for the missionaries. There's work involved in entertaining visitors, but we were always glad for people to come. Just a little bit about the protests. I said that the government is fairly stable. Usually they are. There was some unrest while we were there. The way it is, the president, William Ruto, was elected president last year, and there's this man, Raila Odinga, they just call him Raila. He has run for president 5 times and lost every time, but it seems he still likes to, and he's a Luo, by the way, so that's his home country around where we were there. But he still kind of likes to be heard and have some clout. And so what he was doing and has been doing occasionally is rouse up his supporters to protest against the president, some government policy maybe. And things are not very good in Kenya as far as the economy. Prices have gone way up. And so there were some things that the president did that Raila said, okay, my supporters, we're going to go out on this certain day and protest. And he said peaceful protest, but you hardly have peaceful protests in Kenya. Now, we knew there was going to be that one day before we went. The 7th of July is called Saba Saba there, which means 7-7, and it's sort of a day when, if they want to do something ornery, I guess that's the day to do it. So we knew they were going to protest that day. So actually, the first full day that we were there, we just stayed in the compound. It's really not safe to go outside when they're protesting. We would hear all kinds of booming and banging and shouting and sirens. It's the protesters against the police, and things really get violent sometimes. So the police have guns, and they use them sometimes. They use tear gas and water cannons and whatnot all. So there was a few people killed not far from the compound. The way it was then, that when that Friday was over, then he said, next week we're going to do another day. And so then next week, then he said, the next week we're going to do 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So it was 5 days that we were staying in the compound. And some of the natives were saying, this could turn into a civil war yet. But we weren't sure we were going to get stuck in Kenya or what. But usually then it seems they find a way to find, the other countries, and even a lot of people in their own country were telling Raila and Ruto, now you need to get together. This is ridiculous. You need to get together and talk and settle these things in a peaceful way. And so, yeah, they got together, I think. Maybe they're still getting together, I'm not sure. But so then after those first couple of weeks, we were free to go out again. It was just the day that he said we're going to do it. Other days it was fine to go out. We'd see some of the evidence of it, like a pile of ashes in the middle of the road with some wires from the tire there yet, or rocks that had been across the road were pushed aside. So we still saw some evidence of it, but it was safe to go out when they were not protesting. Okay, I'll get to the pictures here soon, I think. Maybe just a few comments yet about what I see as positive growth there, plus maybe some needs there. There certainly has been growth in number of churches. It's been encouraging to see new churches starting. It's been encouraging to see a lot of national pastors being commissioned and ordained. The way it's often done there is we will commission a man for a year, and if he qualifies, of course, and then and there's a process of voting that we go through, but then after a year, his ministry is evaluated, and if we see that he qualifies, then at that point he'll be given an ordination charge. Now at the church I'll get to that a little later, I guess. I think I have some pictures. And there have been a number of genuine conversions, people that were drunkards, and there's one man especially that was a notorious cattle thief. And he's a Christian, a member of one of the churches. While we were there, they had a special service at that church. We weren't there, but I heard that he gave his testimony, and it was just touching, the way his life has been changed. Kenyans don't weep very easily, but he did that day. So those are some of the positive, good things. There's still a lot of needs, and probably not all that different from needs that we have, but one thing especially, if we could somehow keep the young people in the churches. Now, education is really pushed in Kenya, has been the last number of years. It's almost a god to some of them, really. If we could have our own schools, I'm sure it would be helpful, but it has been a challenge to do that. It seems like it's a little easier to start a church and hand it over to them than to start a school, because a school takes a lot of money, and they don't have that. Usually don't have enough money, so it would take a lot of American support at this point yet to have schools. So a lot of them go to the public schools, but then they want to go on to the university. So to do that, they have to leave home and go out to city somewhere, and that's often when they lose out then. And so there's just a need of more young people to stay in the churches. Now, in recent years, they have begun a once-a-year, forget what it's called, like a seminar, special meetings for the young people. They have it out in the kudu, and the two get together, and they give a lot of teaching to the young people and singing and activities and so on. I think that has been a step forward in trying to keep the young people. And the other thing is to have scriptural marriages. So many of them today are just shacking up. Now they have their traditional way of getting married, which is the young man will pay dowry for his wife, and the families will get together and have a dialogue and discuss it and an agreement, and then they'll be married. And the missions policy is that we recognize that as marriage. We do, though, ask that before they become church members, they would have their marriage legalized, which would be a marriage officer would have charge of them exchanging vows, and they would sign a certificate, and the government would have record of it. But the thing is, they don't even bother with the traditional marriage so much anymore. You think there's a young man here in the church that's doing pretty well, and the next thing you hear, he's shacked up with this young lady. So it's really a problem right now to try to have scriptural marriages and strong families. There's so few whole families in the churches there. So often the young people leave, or maybe it's just the husband, yeah. Any questions so far?
Where do they get the money to go to the universities?
They seem to find it somehow. Sometimes they try to borrow from the missionaries. We don't do that very freely. Some missionaries have been a little more free in loaning money than others. But I appreciate how one young man there, I think it was Javon Beach, he made this comment. He said, well, people ask me, can I borrow money from you? And he tells them, well, the Bible says that the borrower is servant to the lender. And I'm the pastor, I'm supposed to be the servant. So, if you loan money, you better be prepared to lose it. And it's probably not the best policy because it can cause friction in the churches. Where am I at here? Sorry about the size of these pictures. I guess I'm not smart enough to know how to take a picture with my phone and make it full screen. Maybe you can show me somebody, but hopefully you can see these anyway. Can this be raised something? Anyway, this was when we were in Philly. Ready to leave, sitting there at the gate. That was our plane outside the window there, and a thunderstorm came up, and a beautiful rainbow formed over the plane there. Yeah, you can see it there. The rainbow just hung there all the time we were waiting on the plane, so I thought that was sort of interesting. We had about a 12-and-a-half-hour flight from Philadelphia to Qatar, which is a small country over in the Persian Gulf. Then we had a 5-hour flight from there to Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, and then a 1-hour flight from there to Kisumu. This was when we arrived there at Kisumu. Karibu, Kisumu, Dala. Karibu means welcome in Swahili. Dala has something to do with home, I believe. So this is the entrance now to the compound, the gate. There's a gate man that's always there opening the gate when somebody is ready to drive in. If somebody comes that he doesn't know, he doesn't just let them in. He gets in contact with somebody, the missionaries, and so that's his little house there where he stays in beside there's 3 men that serve as gate men there. They're on duty for about a week. It was interesting. We drove in there the first day, and here was a gate man that had been there 11 years ago, still there. This is the house that we lived in, the side view of it. Front view of the house is like a double house. To the right would be a carport, and then a metal, like a privacy fence there, and then another carport, and another family right next. We were right next to Javon Beachy's there. This is a home like many of the natives live in, just under construction here. What they do is put poles in the ground, dig holes, put poles in the ground, and they put these cross pieces inside and outside, and then they put mud inside those cross pieces. So this one is just, there's a pile of mud outside there, I think. This one is just being constructed. Here, this is a picture of inside one of their homes. You see that low table there. That's the way many of the houses are furnished, like a low coffee table-like table there, and then seats out around. Pretty crowded usually in their sitting room there. This particular lady was a church member. I think it did a lot of sewing, so she sewed a lot of those nice covers there. Now this is another house that has been mudded now one time, but you can still see the poles there. So what they do, they'll put some more coats on there later. Now often the last coat, they mix cow dung in. They say that makes it more smooth. So a lot of the people that we work with still live in houses like this, although there's more and more permanent style houses being built. This one is just a little building, and on the roof there is sorghum being dried. Here was an interesting one. To get to our church, we went out the main road for maybe 20 minutes or so, and then we had to get off the main road, go back a dirt road a little ways. So one day we went out there, and here they had laid tarps out in the road and was covered. They had rice spread all over the road. Well, how are we going to get there now? Oh, man, just come on. So several times at least we got there. There was rice spread over the road. We just drove over it. People were walking across it. By evening they would take it up. Now this picture is headed out, so at the far end there is where the main road is. Here they were drying. It was harvest time, so they were drying their sorghum here. Some of it on the right there has already been threshed, and some is still in the head. They'll take a stick or something and pound it and beat it to thresh it. We got to, I think this was Bible study, wasn't it? We got to this lady's house for Bible study, and she was out milking her cow. And here's, you see there, they don't look fed as well as we feed our cows, right? And there was like this cement enclosure with cows inside, the same place. Here was maize. They call their corn maize, and so every day there's lots of sunshine there. Almost every day is sunny, particular certain times of the year, and so they spread it out there to dry, and then they'll bag it and keep it in their house somewhere. And every so often they'll take some out to the local mill, posha mill they call it. They'll get some ground, and they make their ugali out of that. Their ugali is something many of them eat almost every day. It's like a thick cornmeal mush type food. So the chickens were getting their share there also. This is trash disposal of Kenya. They would come out every Saturday morning and collect our trash, and somehow they always found room to put a little more in one of those top bags there, it seemed. And this is just a common sight, chickens, ducks roaming around outside. This is the lake, just a picture by the lake. Now actually, Kisumu, yeah, it's right by the lake, but it's just like a little finger of the lake that comes in, and that's where Kisumu is located. So this man is called Titus. He's a man there that gives boat rides. He was also there back 12 years ago, more than we were there. Today he's still there giving boat rides. We went on a boat ride when the Mountain View group was there. This is Caleb Weirich and his wife, I think, one of the ministers at Aroda that was there with the group. And so I joined them, a few of the others joined them that morning for a boat ride. You go out, pretty often you're not so far from the shore. You see all the sights along the shore, and then you also go out a little further, and if you're fortunate, you can see a few hippos out there coming up out of the water. I think that morning we only saw one, but there have been times we saw quite a few. There's a fish market along the lake. There's lots of fishing done at Lake Victoria. Fishermen are out there at night fishing. Often they have nets, and then in the morning they bring their fish in here to the market to sell. I think that's just another one of the fish market. Unit activities. About a year or so ago, they built a pavilion there in the compound to use for special unit activities. So this was one evening we had a supper there. I think it's Kevin and Veronica Byler there in the foreground, a young couple he's actually the lamp and light man there presently. They're from Dixon, Tennessee. This was the Mountain View group out by the lake. And then one morning we had them at our place in the carport there for breakfast. The youth, anyway, that were with the group were there. And they're having some fun there with our dog, Prince. Some of the families there have dogs, and that dog seemed to know. He knew certain people. Depends who walked past our gate. Mostly if it was a black person, he would bark and sound ferocious, but there were certain people he knew, and especially the missionaries, he would be just so friendly, and so he's a pretty smart dog. Okay, this is just a typical site. Picture now we're going visiting maybe to someone in that home in the background, so we drive back this dirt road and go about as far as we can. And our interpreter that's with us, he says, well, now, here, just park here, maybe half on the road even, or some spot where it seems suitable to park. And then we walk back here, maybe even beyond those houses to some other houses beyond there to visit. This is Maurice. He was the one that often went with us to interpret for us. He's a widower. He has lost 2 wives already to death. He's a retired veterinarian, so he doesn't have a full-time job. He still does a little treating animals sometimes, but he was very available to go with us visiting. That was a real blessing to always have him available. He's fluent in English. And so there we were by the rice fields. There's a large area there of rice fields. They're divided into plots and some people own maybe an acre or so, or a lot of people work in the rice fields. Even the widows will go out and work in the rice fields. There's lots of work there's plowing and planting and harvesting, and there's just a lot of work to growing rice. But it does provide work for a number of people there. There's some bananas. It's very common to see banana plants there in the area. This was in the town of Ahedo as we were walking the street there, a man pushing a load of oranges. And this was again out by the lake one evening when the Mountain View group was there. We went out and had spent the evening there. Here they're cooking. This is a common way for them to do their cooking. They'll put 3 rocks down on the ground, start a fire there in the middle of the rocks, set this pot on the rocks, and that's where they do their cooking. Very few of them have ovens, so if they want bread, they have to buy it. But there's certain things they can make. And this was actually right out by the street, Ring Road it's called. We would walk out there occasionally. There were some shops along there where we could buy fruit and vegetables. And so there's somebody there too that makes mandazis and chapatis, if you know what that is. And so they had this fire going right out there by the street. Just a shot there of what we call Yacht Club, a place along the lake where we went to eat sometimes. They feed their corn fodder to their cattle often, and so here there's cattle feeding on the fodder. Barbara had lollipops along, and so as we went out walking and visiting, sometimes she would pass these out to the children. You could soon get a group of children together if you had sweets, as they call them. And when you're out there visiting, it seems like there's children all over the place. You go into somebody's house, and usually there's several houses close together, and after a bit some children come in. It might be grandchildren of the widow that lives there, or neighbor children. There's just lots of children around. And as they see us go, they'll say, Mzungu, Mzungu, which means white person. Or they'll hold out their hand. They want something. So we give them You can even pass out literature. They'll take whatever you want to give them. They're just, they'll take it. Okay, this was a lady called Pamela that we had a good friend from way back. She had been a member at Lala at one time, then she transferred to Ahado. She's a seamstress, does a lot of sewing. So we visited her one day. Her husband, unfortunately, he drinks a lot. He makes life hard for her. She says that I think they have rice, and then they sell their rice, and they ought to have some money from the rice, but he just spends it on drink. So she has a rather difficult life, but it does seem like she does well with her sewing and has managed to survive. Here we were in the house of a widow, and like I said, there's children come along, and I think they were probably grandchildren of this lady. There's 3 Barbaras here. You know the one in the middle. The one on the left is the daughter of, her mother passed away a couple years ago. She was a church member, her mother was. Her father still attends some. He's been sort of in and out of the church. But she was born, I think, when we were over there, so they named her Barbara. The one on the right is also Barbara. One day back then, in about 2011, we were walking, was it to or from church? We were walking because it was too muddy to drive there. And so this person came out from a house nearby and said, somebody here needs transportation, a lady about to give birth. Could you take her to the hospital? Well, what I did was gave him some money to find transport to the hospital. And then a little later we heard that she had a baby girl and she named her Barbara. And now, interestingly, we go back there 11 years later, and this girl is often coming to church there. She just lives not far away. So, we got a picture of these 3 Barbaras together. You might recognize the man on the left, Amata, Thomas Amata, that preached here on New Year's Day. He stayed at our house for about 3 days. And so we got a picture of us together there. And then, interestingly, we were able to visit his house. They live almost like on the edge of the slums of Kisumu, actually. A pretty decent house they live in right now, made of metal. They have electricity in there. They served us a delicious meal. That's their family there. Their oldest girl, I'm not sure what her name was, but they lost, 5 children that died, I think? 2 sets of twins. And then they did have this, this one girl now is named God's girl. And then the boy is named Goldman, I think, something like that. Yeah. They do give, sometimes we chuckle a little at the names they give. They like to name their children after the missionaries. There's been Bishop Merles there, or there's, what else? Some others, that were named after missionaries. Anyway, Amata is in the process of building a new house right on his land there. I think it'll be a good bit nicer than this. I think he has some bricks. And then since we're back, I think I told him to keep me informed of how he's progressing with his new house. So he sent me this picture. They're digging out the footers there. That's their way of doing it. So this is not going to be just a mud house. It'll be a brick house, but they're still using the old way to dig out the footers. Here we were visiting a couple widows, I think.
Question, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the ground really hard?
The ground?
Yeah, to dig out.
Oh. Yeah, some places. Now, when they want mud to build a house, there's certain kinds of soil they want, and they don't always have it right where they live, so they have to have it transported in sometimes. I mean, they do farming there, so a lot of the people are subsistence farmers. In other words, they have an acre or 2 of land that they own, and they grow some maize, some sorghum, and that's what they eat. They hope that they'll get enough rain to get a good enough crop to last year round. That's pretty much the way many of them live. If they do have a job, probably $3 to $5 a day is what they get. And of course, probably goes further than it would in America, but yeah, they certainly don't live the way we do. Okay, this one is at church. There was usually some children came around early, and so Barbara had some crayons and some papers, things for them to color. So they would go there on this reed mat, and they were real polite. They took their shoes off, and they would go on there and color until it was time for church to start. Yeah, there's preaching with an interpreter. That is Jacob. He was at one point he was commissioned as pastor there at Lela. After 1 year, he felt that he was too busy. He works for Christian Aid Ministries in the orphans program, and so he felt he was too busy to continue with the work as a pastor. And so they released him from that. It was sort of a disappointment to the church at Lela, I think, because the church has been going now for 14 years or so. When we first went there, the church had just started. It was a very young church. So all these years, they've not had a national pastor until Jacob was commissioned. So it was a bit of a disappointment, but I think they have accepted it. He's a very fine man. He was baptized there soon after we were there first time. And him and his wife were both members. They're very good people. He had a good, strong voice to interpret. So he mostly interpreted for me when I was preaching. Okay, here is Sunday school class. Let's see, where's the volume on here? I'm not sure if this will come through or not. Is there a volume button on here? It is coming through there, but not very loud. This is Jacob's wife. She was teaching the class, and then always at the end of the class, before the message, the class would get up front and have a little presentation there. You probably can't hear that very well. There's another one here. This is one of the Barbaras, and she's giving a little recitation there. It's actually, some of what she was saying was in English. Okay, this is singing in church now. It's in Luo, of course. So we had little songbooks we used in church. It was in Luo, but many of the songs are familiar English songs. So we could follow after pretty well. You know, we didn't always understand what we're singing, but the tunes were familiar usually. This particular one was Abide With Me. It was a different tune, I believe, but the word Bedi Koda means like abide with me. This is a picture of the church at Lela. It was erected in the years we were there. At first we met in the home of one of the members, and then eventually we bought some land and erected this structure. That is Jacob and his wife Joyce and one of their boys. We were at their home visiting. They have a pretty nice house. They painted the outside. I think it was mudded, but then they painted it. And here is Jacob's well. This particular Jacob, this well was dug by Agape a number of years ago. And usually when Agape dug wells, they had national crews that dug the wells by hand dug wells, and then they would put the pump in. And often it was actually supposed to be a community well where other people from the community were able to come in and get water. This is a picture we took the last Sunday we were there of the church there at Lela. Some of them are members, some are not. But, it's interesting, we had planned to take some photos at the end of services, and before I ever got to say anything that we want to take pictures, why they said they want to take pictures. Now that would not have been 12 years ago because they didn't have cameras or smartphones then, but now most of them do. And so they were actually anxious to have some pictures. It was in the home of one of the former members. A couple of their grandsons were there. And That's inside a school. Now, many of the schoolrooms we have been in where there were a lot more desks in the room than that. I'm not sure why there's so few there. Maybe that was just a small class. But that they usually have this bench that they share with another student, and some books like that look like they've probably been around for a number of years. But that's the school outside. Okay, this is church service at Lala. Like I said, there's not a lot of people, usually attendance somewhere around 40. This is on the road. Now, since we were there years ago, they put a 4-lane highway into town, into Kasumu. They call it dual carriage is what they call 4-lane highways. And there's some things they say different than we do. You don't pass people on the road, you overtake them on the road. But this is the dual carriage going into town. There's a crosswalk there. Then over to the left, there's like a place for vehicles to pull off. Like it's every so often they have that where you can pull off and pick up passengers or cargo and so on. So it was really, the roads have really improved, many of them, in the years. This is a little what it's like to drive. You drive on the left-hand side of the road. That's a tuk-tuk, a little 3-wheeled thing. Lots and lots of them on the road. And of course, they don't go as fast as the vehicles. And so you frequently have to pass them, try to find a chance to pass them. And this is really, this probably doesn't give you a good picture of what traffic is like in Kenya. There's often a lot more on the road than this. I don't use the word crazy very frequently, but I think it might be a good description of the driving in Kenya. So it's, when you pray for safety, you think about it a little more than you do here, because I think Ben and Gina, remember, you can have accidents there, right? You were with me, weren't you? You were with us when somebody ran into us, I think. I was prepared to make a right turn, had my turn signal on, and I was watching a vehicle coming out of the other road there, and as I was starting to turn, this matatu, this taxi van, comes buzzing along and hit us in the front corner, and Ben and Gina were with us, I think. And this you'll run across as you drive the roads, and cattle in front of you. You just have to slow down and wait or kind of find your way through. Or here, there's a sugarcane truck, lorry, they call their trucks. So there's a sugarcane truck and 2 tuk-tuks, all going rather slow, so you have to either poke along behind or keep watching and find your chance to overtake them and get moving. We were out in town, or we were out visiting one day and went to town for lunch. Out along the lake, there's this man that makes things out of, here he's making a chair. We got some baskets. They make them either out of water hyacinth or papayas. And they claim that is what baby Moses, the basket that he was in, was made out of. Okay, this is not quite the right order. That's the lunch we got out there. Typical lunch, very tasty. Fanta orange and chapati and green grams. Yeah, very, very tasty lunch. There's one of those matatus, and you see what they're carrying, long pipes. They carry anything in there. And they have them sticking way out the front, way out the back. Now, I just have a few yet of, if you ever go to Kenya, be sure to go to the Masai Mara, which is the game preserve. It's hundreds of square miles of open land where all the wild animals roam around. You don't want to miss that if you go to Kenya. We didn't get there this time. We have a lot of pictures from previously when we were there, but we did go to the local Impala Park, which is just 10-minute drive out by the lake. And so one day we went there to see a few wild animals. The zebras roam freely within the park there. The impalas roam freely, the monkeys, and other animals are pretty much in the cages. This is a warthog, turtle, There's the impala feeding on something they were given there. There's the monkeys. Could spend a lot of time just watching them performing. Giraffe there, and the monkeys helping themselves to some of his feed. There was a leopard, ostrich, more zebras, including a baby. You could get up pretty close to them. This was an eland, something in the sort of the deer family. Okay, this is the final one I have, again out by the lake, showing a nice sunset out there. Are there any questions before I close?
In your 3.5 years there, did you learn to enjoy the Ugali?
Yeah,
Question was what?
if we learn to enjoy the ugali. Did you eat some when you were there? You hated it. It's sort of tasteless, but what you do, they usually serve it with maybe chicken with broth with it, or cabbage, or something with broth. Now, another thing, you often eat with your hands there. Now, they often give us a fork or spoon, and probably more so now than they did back then. But what you do, you take your hand, they serve this ugali on a big platter. You take your hand, you grab a big chunk there, and you sort of make a ball in your hand. Then you take your thumb and punch a hole in it, and then you dip the broth out with that. It's pretty good if you have broth with it. The ugali wasn't my favorite food, but I could eat it. I did like their chapatis, which is sort of like a tortilla. Mandazi is sort of like an unsweetened donut, I guess you would call it. And some of their food is really good. Others, you try to get by without eating it. They love to serve you food, and they're sort of offended if you don't eat much. But and again, they often don't expect that you eat everything they give to you. Any other questions? All right, I'll turn it back to Marius.